Okay, great. And we're live here from the Bushwick Generator in Brooklyn for the New York City node of the Open Media Legal Hack, a global series of distributed events happening around the world to explore and develop solutions and creative ideas for musicians and creative artists the idea is to use technology to break through some of those barriers, the legal obstacles, the business model barriers that have been really difficult for musicians and creatives and composers in the past. So there's some new opportunities lately with new technologies, with new statutes, Music Modernization Act, and just the times we feel may be right to make progress. And so we have asked a industry thought leader to join us, who I'll ask you just to introduce yourself and to provide some background. But in short, Jesse is a pioneer in the space and has got a very innovative business model himself with New. New stands for
New Universal Entertainment.
New Universal Entertainment, so much more than an agency. So we've asked Jesse to join us to provide some context in the industry, to sort of unpack and give us some background, maybe start to point the way toward what are the areas that may be receptive and where there may be good timing and a good fit and good value for the good hack. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us, and let's explore some beats and some bytes. Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, man. Thank you.
We're going to hack
it. All right. So just a quick introduction. My name is Jesse Kay, and I run a company called New. And New really lives at the intersection between technology, brands, and music. And music is a kind of, the belief is the lowest barrier to entry when we're talking about culture. Music is the universal language. Music is the great connector. I even believe when you're first born, your beat, you know you're born because your heart catches a beat, a rhythm with the world. I really believe that music makes the world a better place. And I've been in the business for about 15, maybe even a little more, plus years. I started as a person throwing events in high school and in college. I was a promoter, putting together events and realizing that like the one thing that made every event better, sure, you needed interesting people and you needed refreshments, but the big connector, what made a party next level, was having a good musical soundtrack or having musical performances. And it just took the experience to another level. And as a party promoter, a young marketer putting on events, I started to realize that this was a key formula to making every event better. And just to give a little more background on myself, out of college, I didn't really have any family in relationships. It was a business that I looked at very fondly from a distance. I was throwing parties and I was starting to get to know entertainers. And I did have like a fluke opportunity in high school to dance in a Puff Daddy music video. And I was like, holy cow, what is this world? This is an amazing industry going on. And went to college for business and studied marketing and international business. But as I got out of college, I thought record labels, especially electronic record labels, were going to be the next wave. I really felt like electronic music was going to be on the ascent, and electronic label would be a great place to learn because in a lot of ways, traditionally in the music business over the past 20, 30 years, or 40, 50 years, the record label controlled the majority of the power in what was, or in a lot of ways, was the current or was the past landscape for the music business. And they had a really good run in a lot of ways, the record labels. And in some ways, they're having a good run again, and we'll talk about that. But I got into that business, and then I started to realize that the record business, and in particular the electronic record business, was not much of a business. It felt like they were giving away more records than they were selling, and it felt like I couldn't really understand how they were creating revenue and opportunity when they controlled such a small piece of the overall pie of the artist's career. And there was a lot bigger opportunities working with artists. So at that point, I thought I was going to go to law school. And I started gearing up to be a lawyer. And, maybe music wasn't going to be my calling. And maybe I could have a law degree to fall back on, or at least be a deal maker with a law degree. And a family friend started talking to me as I was studying, and he was a lawyer, he was a judge, and he started asking me, do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to go to court? Do you want to do trials? Do you want to review contracts firsthand all the time? And the answer to that was no. And so he said, it's important to understand the intricacies of the deal, but you should be an agent. That's where you get to work with the artists on their behalf and really help them break. And so I started basically calling every agency in the book and begging them for an opportunity to work with them and work for them. And I called a bunch up, and one agency called me and said, yeah, I just fired my assistant, so why don't you come in and start tomorrow or start right away? And I started working at one boutique agency, and then learning from representing artists and working on the artist side. We were doing all these different contracts for a big tour at the time was Scream, the Scream tour, the Scream 2 tour. I did the contracts at my first gig. And then another agency that I called me up about a month and a half later and said, hey, we liked you on the phone, but we didn't have a position. Something just opened up. Would you want to come here? Where are you right now? And I explained the company I was at, and he was very competitive and kind of a little bit of an old school mentality. He was like, I don't like that company. I don't like that guy. I'll pay you more. Please come here, whatever it takes. We just got financing, and we'll let you skip the process of being an assistant, and you can sign artists and be an agent. So going the boutique route, I was able to skip the mailroom and skip the kind of traditional routes of being, how it works in the kind of larger firms. And I was able to go out there and sign talent. And I quickly started signing acts, and they started pretty quickly taking off. I mean, the first act I signed was Clips. I don't know if anybody in this room knows Clips. They had a song called Grindin'. They were the first artist signed to Pharrell's record label. And the album took off, and we toured the world. And that was kind of my first artist representation experience, was an act that was, on tour with Nelly in arenas, and then on tour with Jay-Z throughout Europe, and then on tour with 50 Cent when he was coming out in the college market. And really just being the first line of defense for everything live, but also learning the intricacies of endorsements and technology deals. And so at that point, I worked as a talent agent for another firm for a couple of years at that agency. And then I moved to LA and started working the video game business and really getting an understanding of what was the digital revolution and what was happening in the music business, and or at least what was happening in Hollywood at the time under this digital revolution. And look, the music business was doing really bad. It was just like digital revolution was destroying the business. And I started to see new opportunities in technology and started to immerse myself in new technology players. And with the new technology players, I moved back to New York after 3 years in LA and started a new agency, which is my company today. It was a different form back in the day, but it was really focused on the kind of divide between representing artists, which I signed and developed a lot of artists, and also bringing together New York's technology and music scene and kind of shining a light on these new companies coming up that I believe was going to be the savior to the business. And then about 4 years ago, we changed the model altogether to be this new age music kind of culture marketing firm, which is where we're at today. And so in terms of the landscape, today. The good news that I would say, and this is for people learning about the music business and the people in the music business, is that for the first time in 20 years, there's growth. And not just growth, double-digit growth. Last year, 2017, started to show a spike in the music business overall. And that's in numerous sectors, right? The recorded music business is starting to make not just money, but a lot of money again. More venture capitalists and venture funding is coming into the music business, which wasn't for a long time. For a long time, people thought music was taboo or an industry that couldn't make money and couldn't figure itself out and was archaic in the way it was thinking, and it was, right? It was run and really empowered by the record labels, which was a model that just doesn't make sense in this day and age, right? Who's buying records? Like, even the concept of a record label doesn't make sense. And, they had a good run. They had an era where you could sell a $20 CD that might cost $1 at most to make. How much does it cost to make a CD? 19 cents, 15 cents, let's say $1 to make, and be able to sell it by the 20 millions. And they were not being transparent with artists, accounting practitioners, and the power was in their hands. The power was in the gatekeepers' hands. It was in MTV's hands. It was in Clear Channel's hands. The way music got out was completely controlled by a certain circuit. And it was a very profitable one for a long time, and it hadn't been. And digital and Napster and Apple and iTunes, and there was a couple other instances where the music business really lost control of their product and their business and decimated it. And so it took a long downward spiral. And that was my whole career, was working in this business where people continued to talk about the good old days and how it used to be and how it'll never go back. And for them, it won't go back that way because we got a new business here. And there's a new opportunity for models. And I'll tell you, more artists are touring than ever before. It's easier than ever to make music. You could be in your garage, you could be in your bedroom, you could be off of just a laptop and make beautiful, huge records. You don't need to go into these very expensive, fancy studios that are dying out too, like the hit factories now, apartments, and probably a much better business for them than they were or could be right now in the music side. There isn't really the same business for recorded music in that old school mentality. There's still some area for high-end recordings, but more music can be made than ever. There's less barriers to entry than ever. I mean, you can put your music up to YouTube. You can now, even as an artist, just as of this month, you can put your music direct to Spotify. You don't even need a label or a distribution partner to go there. And, a lot of credit goes to the streaming services for figuring out a system where you can now get paid as an artist, and millions of dollars are going out. Unfortunately, a lot of that kind of portion is still going to record labels because of current deals that are in place, or still a kind of a reorg of the business, which is something that we're going to get to talk about. I'm excited for the afternoon breakout sessions because we can really talk about where the opportunities are to kind of reinvent the model and to hack the current system. But it's a time where, with social media, artists can talk direct to their fan base and they can create direct relationships with their fans. And it's a great spot to be in for an artist that wants to be in control of their career, because there's more power than ever in the artist's hands, and they don't need to go traditional routes. And there's more and more case studies popping up where you can be successful. And hopefully that brings the middle class back into artistry, because it really feels like, in the past decade or so, you either made it or you were flat broke, and it was hard to do it in between. And now there's all these tools that can make it self-sustaining for artists to create music and to distribute music and to galvanize a fan base all over the country, all over the world, and super serve their fans. And we're seeing more and more brands and advertisers coming into the music space, and we're seeing more and more artists interested in working with brands. It's a great time for music branding. There's so much noise right now in advertising, and there's how do you cut through that noise? A lot of it can be with utilizing musicians, and especially emerging musicians. Their fan base is so engaged, and you can super serve those fans, and those fans are really interested in what an emerging artist has to say. So it's great for emerging artists. It's also great for the top level artists that are able to command more money for tickets and sell really great VIP packages, and artist merch and artist partnerships are going to a new level. Artists like Kanye West are able to partner with Adidas in true partnership form and make a ton of money, create billion-dollar brands. I think it's just really the early days in growth right now, because with rights and with publishing and with artists in control of their brands and in control of their careers and getting smarter and more entrepreneurial, it's a big opportunity for artists as we know it to change the rules and for new players to step up. And we see it. We see, like, one of the hot conversations right now is the kind of formation of the business. It's the record label of the future, so to speak. It's what a modern day music company looks like in terms of rights, in terms of all the different pieces of the pie. If it's touring, if it's advertising, if it's publishing, and the rights holding, the rights holders for publishing. Recently, obviously, this big ruling passed, and just last week, or I think now 2 weeks ago, it was signed off on with the Music Modernization Act. And this it opens up so many opportunities for a new examination, a new look at the publishing business as we know it. Because, again, these systems were created for a long time ago and have not been modernized. And people don't have the answers, which is what's interesting right now for all of us, sitting on a Saturday in Brooklyn, and all the folks at MIT that are watching this content. This is an opportunity to literally reinvent the business. And I come from a background of representing artists, and I think it's important to think and take artistry and take artists' mentality into everything that's being considered. It can't be a bunch of hackers deciding where the music business is going. I think it requires different culture, diversity, and stakeholders at the table. Artists are the most creative forces that I know. They are on the finger of the pulse of what's going on, and they can shape culture better than most because they've got the penchant to take bold risks, and they've got a tribe-like fan base that they'll follow what they're saying, a community behind them. So it's a really interesting time for artists, and I feel like artists need to be more actively involved in writing the future. I know Jay-Z, love him or hate him, took a bold step in buying and creating his own streaming platform. Sure, everything that guy does is good business, but I think, one big statement there was that he was able to be an artist at the table with Apple and Google, with YouTube and Spotify. All these tech folk are, launching these big platforms that are in a lot of ways controlling a large funding source of the music business. And to have Jay-Z at the table as one of the big five with his own platform, I think is an important statement, and hopefully something that other artists will get behind. Because when it comes to publishing, when it comes to controlling rights, it is so complicated. I know that we can simplify it a little bit, but it really is who wrote on a song, who didn't, all the intricacies of how that song is made and produced and distributed, and how you attach that all, and then systematize it, and then be able to trace the financing of it, and if it's being played on the radio, or if it's being played at a restaurant, or if it's being played at a sports arena, or if it's being played by a DJ, or if it's being played on Spotify or on Apple Music. Every single one of those rules are different. Every single one of those deals are different, and so it's very complicated to track that. And I feel like the blockchain, and all of the bright minds and energy going into the blockchain is the perfect platform to help reinvent, in so many ways, the rights and the rights tracking system, and really empower artists on another level and creators on another level. And so I've been a big proponent of, like, look, music business is back and everyone's making money. And in particular ways, the labels made so much money off of the equity that they held in Spotify, that, like, they're in a really powerful position again. But this is not a time to rest on your laurels. This is a time to get back into the lab and understand that there's more money and there's more opportunity than there's been in a long, long time. And now's the time to rewrite the rules, and to write them in a way that is going to be beneficial for the creators and the users of the music and the consumers, and ultimately for the modern times. Because again, we might have to write that faster than ever in this day and age, but right now the system in place is clearly not working to the best of its ability, and we got a chance here to fix that. And so that's what we're here to do.
All right.
Great.
Thank you. And we could do a Q&A. I mean, if there's any questions about anything in particular that you want to chat about, or we can get right into it. But, like, I'm happy to answer questions from my perspective, and dive into any area in particular that you want to talk about.
At least a few questions. Can I use your...
Sure, of course.
Unfortunately, sorry. Here you go.
So
you just hold it.
That was probably the most optimistic iteration of what's going on in the music world that I've heard in a long time. And I'm not so optimistic, but first question is your position fairly universally held in the emerging, your colleagues and competitors equally optimistic?
I think it depends on how long people have been. Yeah, I think it depends on how long people have been in the business, right? Because if you saw that era of the 90s and the 80s where you were just minting money, it was a different ballgame. I think that a lot of artists, though, are seeing control over their content, and I feel like they're definitely experiencing that. But yeah, it's tough because with all of this music coming out and all of this content being created, what Spotify, I think, has 20,000 new songs a week coming out on it. How do you differentiate yourself? And it's a much smaller piece of the pie. But I mean, I think that, yeah, the proof is in the pudding. If you look at the overall trends and the forecasts and the data, more money's coming back into it than a long time ago. Compare this era to 15, 20 years or 25 years ago, there was a lot more money in music. So, from my perspective, someone that's been in the trenches for 15 plus years, I've been pushing a rock up a mountain to get any momentum. And now there's more and more money coming in. There's more and more people asking about the business. So I definitely feel a positive. I feel momentum, and I feel like times are changing, and I feel like more bright minds are talking about music than ever before. But maybe some of the kind of old guard which is still very much in place and in power, wouldn't share that sentiment and probably wouldn't encourage things like this in the same capacity.
Jump in, but I mean, and this is from my layperson's outsider perspective. What it looks like to me is that Spotify has taken over the entire pie, and Groove Shark and Pandora. They've got so much, roadkill on the side, existing in Spotify's wake. It seems like everything is. It's what happened with WhatsApp or Uber. There's been this ridiculous capital flight to the single winner that managed to build, create the network effects and brought everyone onto its platform, which is Spotify. It means everyone else was a loser, and we sort of forget about all the losers that now exist. I'd love to know, first of all, if I'm wrong about that, and second, you said there's a lot more money coming in. Where is that money going? To whom? What are the successful? What do the moneyed interests think are the successful projects out there? I mean, Tidal, I don't think is succeeding. As far as last I heard, Tidal was about to go bankrupt, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, look, Spotify. It's definitely Spotify's time. Right? They went public very recently. They were very successful so far on the market. They spent a ton of money, almost as a Netflix-esque model where they could lose $900, $800 million that they're spending into the music business, putting behind artists, putting behind campaigns, putting in their own brand, and making it up on valuation and on the stock. But I don't necessarily think that if you look at it, it's not just Spotify in the music business right now. I mean, companies like Live Nation their stock is at an all-time high. And I feel like with Spotify, there's YouTube, there's Apple Music. All of these players are there, and there's now room for the next iteration. So I don't think it's only a Spotify one-trick pony right now in the music business. I think that they're a big winning case study that's bringing a lot more interest and has kind of helped us get past the era of illegal downloads. And I think they were really successful in creating this next chapter. But I don't know if the future is Spotify's. I think for Spotify, I don't even know what Spotify's future looks like. It could be a data business. It could be a hits business of its own where it's putting out its own music. They're in an interesting position because they've got a lot of market share, but they're definitely not the only trick pony. I mean, I think Apple is getting more subscribers regularly and understandably so. And I feel like YouTube is definitely the most streamed and most used of all the services at this point. And I think so there's a lot of room for growth. Where that money is going to, it's going to the rights holders. So, yeah, I mean, more artists are touring and there's more money made in the live space, and that's great, and that's a big revenue stream. But when it comes to who Spotify is paying out and who YouTube is paying out and who Apple's paying out, it's whoever owns their rights. And a lot of times, artists are signing over those rights to publishing companies to administer because there isn't necessarily the best way to track that, and to record labels to promote them. And so, more money's coming to artists, but it's a trickle down from some more of the traditional houses at this point still, even though if an artist is putting their music up direct on Spotify, they're going to see a much bigger piece of that pie, and it'll be a lot more transparent, although it still doesn't make perfect sense. None of these accounting principles are super transparent and clear, and I think it's a big issue in the business, and I feel like transparency can really be helped, and I think will be a big game changer in terms of putting more control in the artist's hands. VCs are making their bets on platforms that are coming up, on content creators. VCs are betting on record labels of the future because I think they see new opportunities for new systems to come up. I think VCs are betting on rights holders and publishing companies. VCs are getting into, I mean, obviously the platforms like Spotify did very, very well for VCs. And Tencent Music out of China is coming here into America, and they're launching a music publishing and record label. So it's just, they're more interested in the rights. They're more interested in the rights holders. They're more interested in the publishing catalogs. They're more interested in the new platforms that are coming up. So there's nothing more viral than music, and I feel like it's feeling comfortable again and systematized in a way that VCs can wrap their head around how they're going to get their money back.
So you said the word platform a few times. We're here in part to figure out, is there opportunity to empower independent artists to disintermediate the server-client model and platforms? Do you see opportunity now for that? It seems like for the next several years, the platforms will dominate. But do you see also a path to ultimately disrupt the platforms through blockchain or other distributed technologies to empower direct from creator to listener models?
Yeah, I think in order to disrupt and a real opportunity for artists, it's two-pronged. One, the infrastructure needs to be created that they can digest and can easily work better for them than what's currently out there. So I think that's on guys like you, the hackers, to kind of help launch new systems that make more sense for artists and are easier to maneuver. And then the bigger or the other component is the promotion, right? In a sea full of noise, how do you stand out? How do you market? How do you get your music heard and seen and felt and experienced? And as artists deep down, that's all they really, really want. So I think it's going to be a combination of creating the right infrastructure that benefits artists, that's easier to understand, and then on top of that, partnering it with the promotion and media outlet component that's going to be able to allow these artists to be seen and felt and heard. I think there's a big opportunity for another MySpace 2.0 for music. I mean, Facebook doesn't care necessarily about artists in that component in that way. So where is that community for artists, right? And where could you put that out? MySpace broke so many great artists, and it was such a breakthrough platform at the time. And I mean, I talk about opportunity right there. It's what's the social network for musicians to not just connect with themselves, but with consumers and their fans. I mean, YouTube is different. YouTube is its own place. YouTube isn't just about music either. YouTube is everything across the board. YouTube is now put in a smart team, and it's growing. And I think YouTube is in a really interesting position. I mean, look, a guy like Drake with one microphone can sell out basketball arenas all over the world with no off days. Like, he's doing way bigger numbers than the NBA. And this could be all over the world. Like, him by himself squares up against the NBA, and it's not even close. But yet, sports in general and the NBA makes way more money in brand spends than music does. And I feel like YouTube's not trying to necessarily solve the problem for the artists, although it's a big part of it. But I think YouTube could solve an even bigger problem, which is how to help brands feel comfortable spending even more money in music, which is clearly that bigger of a opportunity to connect with really, inspiring, authentic content. So I think that's part of it. And then also, I think YouTube needs to figure out how to empower artists and put more money in the rights holders' hands too. So I think YouTube has big potential. I really am bullish on them, and I love their team. But I don't think that necessarily that's the only opportunity for innovation.
I have one.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Could you speak a little bit? So part of the trend that's happening that's especially relevant for this legal hackathon is that Music Modernization Act that you mentioned and some other trends, that the web and just the app and mobile and perhaps blockchain emerging capabilities make possible to do some of the goals that you just laid out. So think something that's much more simple for artists. The theme of your talk so far has been ever more direct between the artist and the consumer, and some of the other themes. Something that the people at Open Music Initiative suggested that we focus on is a vision for a global database, which could be distributed, could be federated, but basically a global authoritative source of data for all artists, or call them rights holders, say, the composers, the performing artists, perhaps producers, and the works, I guess I would call it, like the songs themselves, so that we could find all the songs, find all the rights holders and match them, and then perhaps somehow make that available for, so it's accessible publicly and can be integrated with any kind of creative and emergent, even business models and apps and services. One of the questions I have for you in view of that vision and, the trend is, what are the issues and obstacles, and also maybe opportunities and possibilities for moving toward a globally interoperable source of data on the artists and the art? Thanks.
In theory, I love that idea. I think that that's some of the direction that the Music Modernization Act is trying to lead us into, and opening up those doors and kind of hopefully forcing the hand a little bit towards that, because there's a big problem. There's different systems and there's different organizations. So I think there's the two main problems I see with that that we need to overcome is past tracks. All of the past catalog, or all of the music out there. If it's 20,000 new songs coming on Spotify alone each week, you can imagine how many millions upon tens of millions of songs that they need to go back to categorizing, which is doable, or maybe not. Maybe we just focus on going forward, and every transaction that's made with the past system just automatically updates. So I think a new system needs to be created. But on top of that, all of these other fragmented systems that are already in place have to follow suit. So now that that law is passed, I feel like the next stage is to create kind of deals and arrangements with the current players in the space that will help us access their catalogs and create a fair opportunity for everybody to know what's going on with artists and with the artist music and the rights holders, and it's a complicated animal. I know that we think it's simple, but I think smart minds really need to be dedicated towards it, and the current rights holders and system in place has to be willing to play ball to creating this. And it really needs to be led by the artists and the rights holder creators in terms of policy. And I'm glad that the government agreed with that and went forward with the act. But I think if we started from ground day one, right? Let's say this is post Music Modernization Act. Let's build the dream system, and then let's incorporate the players from there. That might be a key way to do it, but it'd be amazing to have the big publishing houses and rights holders with the largest catalogs on board to do this, because otherwise, how are artists going to do this? You got to kind of buck the system, and the only way to do that is to kind of have history on your side.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mind? Okay, I'll do it fast. So there's a little part of what you said in there that I want to follow up on, partly because next weekend we'll have quite a few more venues of the Open Media Hack. Kansas City in particular has got a lot of artists that are going to be part of all the teams. And I think Brazil is also very focused on artists. We'll have a bunch of Berklee College of Music people at the Media Lab next weekend. So in the spirit of that part of what you said about looking day forward, leaving aside for the moment the migration for the huge corpus of data and the tangled, web of systems that we've inherited, looking day forward, as a person that's been successful in the sort of agency and the I guess in the realm of getting people involved and in finding a way to connect with people in markets and context, connect them with art. What are some ideas or directions people should be looking for? How maybe artists that are 10 years old today and that are going to become aware soon and have art they want to share. Where are the points in the value chain, like at GarageBand or at the web or on Instagram? That's a big thing, where they could discover how to get themselves into a system, and where the incentives could be aligned such that they would seek to do that. Like, that seems like a big campaign to me, and I'm not even sure how to get my head around what are successful approaches to starting to tackle that. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I've got a system called the Rockstar business plan, and that's basically how you go from ground up to global scale as a musician. And in this day and age in particular, where all the tools and times are changing, I think it starts with product. I mean, I think it starts with the actual what you're putting out in the world. If it's a T-shirt, if it's a song, or if it's an album, I think it really starts with the quality of the product, and then I think it's the vision and where you want to go, and your personality, and how you position yourself towards getting there. And then the next step, I would say, is about assimilating a team around it. There's a little joke: it takes a village to break a brand. I mean, to break a band. Because it does. It requires not just an artist, and I think it's really important to have a team around you, from management to agency or agents to who's helping you on the record label side to publishing. I mean, you've got to think about yourself as an artist at this point like you're a corporation, and I think you got to think about yourself in that regards, like you're actually your own company and not just an artist putting out music. So it's a lot to kind of wrap your head around. It might require partnering there. And then I think from there, it's really about getting distribution. How do you put your music and your product in the right people's hands? And I think at that point, it could really move on to partnerships, and who you can connect with, if it's who you can share audiences with to get more attention, and who you can connect with that's going to bring more people towards what you're doing. I think distribution's really important. I think you got to know where your audience is. I think you got to super serve your audience to some extent. And I think you got to be thinking on a global level. I don't think it's really just about locking down your block or your neighborhood or your community. I think to really make it to, from 5 fans to 5 million fans, you've got to be connecting in different markets and playing for a much bigger market than just your local space. You got to be thinking not just national, but global in this day and age.
Another one of our speakers and kind of aces in the hole in the industry and with the technology and the law had a question. Can you introduce yourself too?
I am Anjali Krana, and I was an entertainment lawyer for the last 10 years, up until a couple months ago. And I guess I'm still an entertainment lawyer. I just don't really practice the same way. And this is Pebble, since we're on camera. So you had mentioned the difficulty of updating older works. And there's kind of the same problem in the law as well, is that, depending on when the work was made, it's subject to different rules. And I'm curious as to, from looking at the numbers from your perspective, do you feel that I think a system that works going forward is going to have to be able to, in order to be adaptable, in order to really last, it's going to have to be a system that treats works the same, regardless of the pre-existing baggage. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, whether you feel that that will make things harder or easier for new artists who are trying to break. Because the rules affect them both positively and negatively right now, and I'm just curious as to how you think that's all gonna look when the constructs that are sort of artificially making them different are removed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that it's going to affect them both positively and negatively. I wish it was as simple as just saying it's going to be better for artists, that there's less barriers to entry and there's more data and there's more information. I think that it is going to be, in a lot of ways, a lot less red tape. So me and you could make a song right now and we could put it out and it could go viral. And all of a sudden, we're like never before the toast of the town. But how you sustain that and how you just do it beyond once is going to require more than just a flash in the pan. And it's going to require infrastructure and team. And it's also going to require a lot of consistent hard work and talent and luck and all sorts of different elements. So I think that, and it's harder and harder because there's so much noise out there to sustain. And so I feel like in some regards, these new technologies and these new tools are going to be great for artists because you can get out there faster than ever and there's less red tape. But in some regards, it's going to be a lot harder. And I think there's a lot more noise and there's a lot more competition and there's a lot more to understand. And some artists just want to be artists, right? You know what I'm talking about. And they don't want to be a corporation. And they don't want to be thinking about all of these new intricacies and all of these new tools and what all that means. They just want to focus on what they do, their craft, their passion. And I think it's probably a lot harder for artists in this day and age to wrap their heads around what it means. And I think that it's going to be a little bit of an evolution and a generational switch where artists 5 years from now are going to have a much better understanding of what it means to be an artist in this era versus, some of the kind of older artists that are just kind of wrapping their heads around what Instagram and Spotify and YouTube and your phone all means to the overall success ratio of what an artist's career looks like.
I think we have one more. That's a good answer. Sure.
Hey, my name is Brian. So I'm sitting down again because I can. But I was going to ask, this is kind of, since it's the last question, this is more of maybe a summary. But you work with a lot of advertisers. You are obviously very connected in the music industry. Let's say someone here, we've got a lot of tech people, a lot of lawyers, a lot of just very smart people. Let's say someone develops MySpace 2.0, like you mentioned earlier. What is, I wouldn't say the path to market, but who's going to take the most convincing? Is it inertia? Is it the publishing houses like you talked about? Just let's say something great comes out of here. How do you make it happen? How would you make it happen?
I mean, it's a little bit of a similar roadmap when it comes to breaking a band as it is breaking a brand. In this day and age, we kind of take a similar mentality, and it starts with the product. So if the platform works, if the platform is convincing, if the platform has benefits outside of what's in the market, I think that's very important. It has to have a vision for what it's trying to do instead of just being this kind of new age place for musicians to connect. What's the higher purpose and how's that translated? And then I think it's really about, obviously all the elements of the Rockstar business plan apply, but I think it starts with getting the artists on board. I think if you've got the artists on the platform, then and they're sharing and they like it, and it's a place where they want to premiere their new music. The nice thing about artists, in particular musicians, is not only are they influencers, they're influencers with talent. And if they put out new product, they've got millions or tens of thousands or hundreds or even more fans that are willing to follow them and live and breathe what they have to say. So if there's new music and new product being delivered, unquestionably fans will be there. And at that point, you have audience. And once you have audience to scale, a whole new world of opportunity comes in there. So I think that it starts really with the product, and then it's about getting adoption from the talent. But if musicians believe in it and they're sharing music, their fans will follow.
One more. By consensus, we actually have two more. Is that all right? Great. Jonathan and Sydney.
I have a couple business models I want to run by you, because I feel like now we're living in the world where, to the extent we're living in a world where every single individual has more power than the largest media empire had 50 years ago. Haven't we, and now everyone can get paid through micropayments. Why? About 15 years ago, I was debating with a writer for the New York Times who was lamenting the fact that there are 1 billion people in China who can read his material. How is that a terrible thing from a writer or an artist's perspective? But for the fact that we didn't have a revenue model 15 years ago, that should be a phenomenal thing. Now that we've got the ability for everyone, whatever, if it's blockchain or micropayments or whatever the system is, Venmoing, isn't there a pretty simple model where every individual controls their own media empire, and they should be doing everything in their power to get that new media to as many people below them on the media tree as possible, and get as many micropayments as possible? So let's say I trust Daza on his music taste. So I'm underneath Daza's music umbrella, and he trusts me on television ideas. And so he's part of my flow. And then there's people upstream from me who are making either video content or upstream from him making music content. Wouldn't it be incumbent upon each of us to try to spread our net as widely as possible so that every single person in our little Ponzi scheme, our little pyramid scheme, in the most positive sense of the term, gets a micropayment across the entire system? It seems to me that's going to be the model of the future. And whoever figures out how to create this beautiful pyramid of endless, perpetual redistribution of content down the media pyramid in perpetuity and always gets their micropayment all the way up the stream to the creator, as long as we can tag it, as long as we can watermark the music, control the music in some sort of online repository so there's no theft of the music, isn't that the model for distribution in the future? Completely creator empowered, and then the power of their own viral networking.
I love this question.
You're bending our minds.
You are. You're onto some.
I didn't bring these up as I could. That's good.
No, I look at this as the kind of futuristic thing of. I think this is where it's going, where there's so much content and so much data out there. It's creativity versus curativity, right? It's about curating the content. What's more important in this day and age? There's so much content out there. Is it the actual creators of the content, or it's the curators that are telling you what to listen to? If you have a trusted curator and you're my man when it comes to television, and you're telling me these are the 3 shows I got to watch, those are the shows I'm going to watch because you're my trusted source. So I do think that with a day and age where there's content and information overload. And that's why I hate when people say, I'm busy. Like, of course you're busy. In this day and age, you can't not be busy. There's so many emails, texts, social media, phone. Like, there's so much information coming at you that it's impossible not to be busy because there's so much coming at you. How do you be productive? How do you disseminate all of this? And it's true. I feel like there's more power in the curator's hands than ever, especially the trusted curators that can really speak to what you need and what you want. So it's reconfiguring, because there was an era where the curators were locked Now there's these new curators that are coming up that are defining the new times because there's so much data coming at us. So I love that. It's a curator versus curator, creator versus curator. And I think there's a lot to this.
As I'm going to the next question, and another aspect of it was connector, when he was talking about pyramids, or maybe more likely graphs and networks. Okay. Sydney, who are you, Sydney? And what are you thinking?
Sure, yeah, a couple things. I feel like my name's Sydney. Here, participant, co-organizer, and just here to share my thoughts. Thank you so much, Jesse. What a fantastic talk you've been able to share with us. We might be circling this question a little bit. Like, for me, this makes me think about, a lot of these independent artists out there who don't really want to be sharing in their revenue streams, and people like Chance the Rapper who, have been harnessing this independent artist model. And from my perspective, and I would just like to know from your perspective, what is an industrious artist? What does that mean? Defined an innovative, industrious artist, if that's fair.
Industrious meaning?
Meaning that they are creating their own brand. Like it's as a means of understanding growth and understanding exactly what it means to be their own brand, and kind of not in sharing in their revenue pie, right? Somebody that's just.
Okay. So the definition, and this is very hard on scale, but my definition of an industrious artist is an artist that understands and controls the relationship with their consumer. And that's different than it used to be. You go to Tower Records and you have no idea. The record labels don't know who their consumers are, and Tower Records, for some part, barely knows who their consumers are. Same thing with Spotify. Putting your artist, your tree up on Spotify, you don't know who your consumers are. You're not speaking directly to them. So where it goes, if you're an industrious artist, same thing with at a concert. At Ticketmaster, when you're putting your concerts up with Live Nation or Ticketmaster, you don't know who's buying the tickets to your show. So you don't know who's in your room. On Instagram, you don't know who your fan base, you know who they are if they like your picture, but you don't own that fan base. You're not controlling that conversation. You're just using Facebook's platform or Instagram's platform. And as soon as they change that algorithm like they did with Facebook, you can no longer directly communicate with your audience that you built on that platform because the rules changed. And if you want to send a post out to them for them to see, you have to pay now. So I feel like in this day and age, an industrious artist is an artist that knows that and can control that conversation with their audience and is working towards a place where the artist's relations with their consumers is their own, and as much of it as possible as their own as they can possibly have.
That's fantastic. I think where we've been circling in this conversation, it is exactly right there, as I put right on there, the artist-to-consumer relationship that I think as we continue to have later on today, we can be focusing on that. Absolutely, that relationship. So, great. Anybody else? No? Great. Hey. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll wrap up this segment. That is a good setting of the table and creating some context and some common terms, also some potential, options and priorities for things to hack, some good ideas. So next up here in New York, we're going to probably break into a few teams. We've got a little list of, ideas and projects that we can choose from on the menu. We can come up with some new ones. And then when we're done with that, we'll ask for a note taker for each team, and then we'll basically report out and share with each other what we came up with. And then there's an opportunity for some dinner and some drinks Saturday night in Bushwick, and a comedy show called what is it?
They're called
Oh, The Bit. It's The Bit. Bitcoin, haha. Okay, so check back at legalhackathon.org for all that and so much more.